So we are live now. Welcome to the fifth session of the lecture series, What is Marxism? Introductory lectures. I will straight away go to our speaker, Professor Pranab Kanti Basu. Pranabda, please you take over. And today's topic is class part 2 and capitalism part 1. Over to you, Pranabda.
Thank you, and welcome to all who are present. Um, so let's go straight away to continue what we had where we had left off. Now, uh, yes, can you see the slide?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes. So we are starting where we had left off the last day. Now we'll be adding a bit to our recapitulation. You'll see as we go along. Now, we had discussed the meaning and significance of overdetermination for the structure and also for the dynamics of the society. What do you mean by overdetermination? How it determines all processes and the structure of the society, and each process is a cause and also an effect of another process. That is what we mean by overdetermination. We discussed what will be the impact on the structure and also the what will happen to society over time, how that is impacted by the idea of overdetermination. We had discussed a concrete instance of how cultural processes and political processes are used by management to delude, to make fools of workers in a factory for achieving the economic objective of capital. Now, we had discussed that we had shown a poster that was really used in a factory. We had taken it from Workers Connect, and we had discussed on that issue. We had also discussed certain macroeconomic phenomena to argue that all such phenomena are overdetermined by cultural and political processes like wage determination, like the location of an industry, etc., etc. Now, overdetermination implies its corollary, that is, the existence of contradiction within any process. Now, if processes are both the cause and the effect of other processes, then they pull and push each other in various directions, and so there are contradictions within each process. No process evolves linearly as predicted by essentialism, and processes are never ending. These are two important results, two important conclusions that we get from using the overdetermined logic. One, that we cannot predict the course of any process, as we just cannot predict the course that societal history will take. And the second is that no process ends. It is a continuous. When it reaches a certain point, then it is impacted by other processes. So this goes on and on. So also are sites. Now this is a concept which I should have introduced in the previous discussion, but I somehow overlooked it. So also are sites, which we may define as bounded set of processes. Processes within or internal to the site more acutely overdetermine each other. Now, what would be the examples of such sites? A person, any individual, would be an example of a site. So also would be a nation. So also would be a factory. Now, an individual as a person, we are overdetermined. Like we have economic motivations, we have cultural motivations, we also have political motivations. We all have political motivations. Sometimes we do not realize when a person says that I am apolitical. You see, this is a very common statement that people make. I am apolitical, I am rational, I am scientific. All these are simply statements. These are only expressing the fact that the person is a person who believes in status quo, who believes in the existing system, and therefore can afford to say that I am devoid of politics. It's only people who resent the existing system, who want a certain change, who would say that we are political persons, or are fighting to maintain a hold on power. They would also be political. They would know consciously that they are political persons, but we are all political. So we have economic motivations, we have political motivations, we have religious motivations. So we, an individual is a site, and so also a nation. See, small sites make up a larger site, so also would be a factory. Site is a concept that we should have discussed prior to discussing class as entry point. So we are introducing it here. The processes within the boundary of a site would be termed internal, and those outside as external. Now, this is a quote from Mao on contradiction. We had said that actually this idea of overdetermination, Althusser says quite clearly, is taken from Mao's on contradiction. Now, so this is a quotation of the external causes are the condition of change, and internal causes are the basis of change. And external causes are the condition of change, internal causes are the basis of change, and external causes become operative through internal causes. Now we can take various examples of this. Now an individual, he will obviously be impacted by outside elements, but what he thinks, what he decides, that is ultimately one's own political decision, one's own economic decision. And similarly, take a nation, for example. Now, at various international forums, we are now facing criticism because of the treatment that we are meting out to the minorities, because of the lack of democratic values, because of instances like Father Stan Swami, etc. But this is not impacting our internal process, which is regressing from a democratic setup to a fundamentalist tending towards a fascist setup. So it is because within the country there is massive support for this setup to which we are regressing. So in spite of external pressures do encourage. Now you'll see that, for example, if you take a newspaper like Telegraph, which is definitely opposed to this regression to fundamentalism, you'll find that it highlights the criticisms at international forums. But all this will, you're trying to influence opinion within. As long as opinion within remains firmly in favor of the fundamentalist cause, there will be no change. So the external causes, they can be conditions, but internal causes are the basis of change. As a result of overdetermination by and contradiction between processes, both internal and external to a each site, just as each process is ever changing. So the no individual, no nation, no party, nothing is static. It is always a dynamic process. There is changing, just like any process. All sites are changing. For example, our country may currently be characterized as largely a capitalist economy with a polity that is regressing rapidly from secular democracy to a religious fundamentalist fascist one. Currently, the ability of the state to suppress workers' rights and give advantages to crony capital on the basis of its popular religious fundamentalist identity endears it to crony capital. This makes crony capital amenable to finance its propaganda. You see, the suppression of workers' rights, the labor codes, for example, and there are various other instances, we are not going to the details of those. So workers' rights are constantly being curbed, they are being suppressed. Now, this is the state operating in favor of the capitalists. In favor of which capitalists? Particularly the crony capitalists. The crony capitalists, who are the crony capitalists? The capitalists who are given special advantages, which can be, you cannot identify the advantages because these are hidden advantages, but you can identify the process, who are the crony capitalists. For example, you would find Ambani, Adani particularly, the kind of growth that he has countenanced. This cannot happen in a normal circumstance, surpassing all other capitalists in the country, not only in the country, but over the world. Now, the crony capitalists are being favored by the suppression of workers' rights, because obviously suppression of workers' rights allows you to make more profit. So at this current juncture, they are in favor of this fundamentalist regime, which is tending towards a fascist regime. Now, why are they in support of this? Because this regime, its stability, its mass support does not depend on its economic agenda. If it depended on the economic agenda, then the working people or even the middle classes would react sharply and they would dislodge the current regime. But that is not what is happening, and I don't see it happening in the near future either. Now, that is because the support is based on a fundamentalist religious identity, and that is what people are supporting. So within this situation, even the working class, a large part of the working class, they are not revolting against the suppression of their rights, and this is in something which the crony capitalist would any capitalist would want. Now, so they would be willing to finance the propaganda machine of the current regime, which we find in terms of the electoral bonds. But it's increasingly unbounded power, that is the increasingly unbounded power of the state, of dismantling judicial, bureaucratic, and legislative checks and balances necessary to a democracy, may encourage fiscal profligacy to pander to its image of godly benefactor. You see, now religious fundamentalism, of course, it cannot thrive simply on fundamentalist propaganda. You see, you in fact have contradictions within the fundamentalist agenda. You have some facts and some elements who are trying to posture towards a inclusive religion. By inclusion, of course, that means destroying some cultures, like, for example, like forget the Gayatri Mandir, the Gayatri movement, Gayatri Mandirs, ashrams, Gayatri ashrams, which is a worldwide movement. It works in this way that it says that we are inclusive. The tribals can come, the lower castes can come, and they can conduct the puja. So that is trying to be inclusive, but at the same time, this is destroying the tribal culture also, because they are not Hindus. But anyway, so you have different kinds of movements, elements within the fundamentalist path. Now, but it is not only just this which can sustain support. You also need to give some economic benefits, like houses, like different kinds of doles. Now, for this, you need money. Now, the government, as long as it's all powerful, it can go on going in. It can go in for not only the central government, the state governments also do it. Fiscal profligacy to pander to its image of godly benefactor, like the 56 inches. Now, you see, it's a godly benefactor to whom we are looking up, and the godly benefactor must give you some benefits in economic terms also. But this profligacy, this may lead to a reversal of trend of tax and other financial benefits bestowed on crony capital. You see, taxes are being reduced, financial benefits are being bestowed on them. Now, all this may be reduced because the government would need money. You see, there is strict capitalist accounting for the government also. The government would need money to finance its these kinds of programs. The outcome of such contradictions is not predictable beyond the diagnosis that it will be critical to the current system. That is, if crony capital opts out, thinks that, well, these things are going too far, within this system there will be economic chaos and we will not be able to sustain. So there will be then a contradiction between even the crony capital and the government. So what will happen is something which we cannot really predict. The ever-changing nature of sites and processes with no determining center makes the beginning of analysis, the entry point, indeterminate. It therefore becomes a matter of political choice. And you see, if it was an essentialist logic, then, like, say, the traditional interpretation of Marx, that you have a base and superstructure. Base is economics, and within that, the forces of production determine change. So then your entry point would be forces and relations of production, the what we call the mode of production. But given the fact of overdetermination, ever-changing nature of sites and processes with no center, it makes the entry point, the point at which you want to enter, you will enter analysis, a matter of political choice. So this is the analyst's own political choice. This leads to the discussion of class. Marx chooses class defined by surplus production and extraction as his starting point. This is determined by his primary concern with exploitation, which was derived from his association with working class movements. We had discussed this previously in our last lecture. The focal concern is what ought to differentiate Marxian analysis and mobilization. It is true that for contesting various kinds of inequities that are forced upon the working people under different situations, they have to find allies outside their class. Now, you see, the working people's rights are being curtailed. Now, to fight for these rights, it is not just the organized workers who can fight for these rights. They have to include the unorganized workers. If they get the support of the farmers, it is all the better, and so on. The middle class, the intelligentsia. So, it is true that for contesting various kinds of inequities that are forced upon the working people under different situations, they have to find allies outside their class. Even in a revolutionary situation, this is necessary, as Marx proposed, and as we shall elaborate under the heading of hegemony in a later lecture. But they have to retain their own identity, that is the working class. Religious fundamentalism, I'm taking an example, religious fundamentalism has a natural tendency towards fascism, and its control on state power endangers the economic interests of the working people in various ways. To fight, it has to ally with forces that also resent religious fundamentalism and fascism. The middle classes, the teachers, even segments of the bourgeoisie, the farmers, a segment of them. So they would have to, they oppose religious fundamentalism and fascism, so they would have to ally with them. But just as the working class must understand and propagate this similarity, what similarity or equivalence, that is, we are all opposed to fascism and fundamentalism. This they have to understand, and with its this is similarity with the allies. At the same time, it must be conscious of its own difference, its identity and intent. Also, it is only an understanding of the exploitative forces of surplus extraction that can lead to the alliance of different segments of working people who are initially mobilized in their concrete differences. That is, we'll discuss this in detail later, that you have people working in, say, the public sector who are considered elite, they are given large privileges. Of course, these are all dying out as privatization proceeds. But there was a time when the public sector workers were different from the private sector workers. And within the private sector workers, also there are categories. There are the casual workers, those who are not do not have organized employment within the organized sector. Now, also you have people working outside the organized sector. So these different segments of working people, they must realize that they have an identity of interest, and where does this identity reside? Within the exploitative system, system of surplus extraction. So this is another reason why this becomes very important. We will discuss why this commitment to the analytic method of overdetermination led Marx to the understanding that in spite of the need for class focus, the abolition of private ownership of property, the basis of class exploitation within a politically emancipated state, was insufficient for establishing complete human emancipation. Now, we had discussed what this political emancipation means, that is, the state no longer bestows any privileges on the basis of identity and to any group, whether it be religious identity, whether it be linguistic identity, anything. So all these, the state is emancipated. This is basically a bourgeois state based, bourgeois democratic state based on adult suffrage. This is where political emancipation has occurred. Now, Marx was aware that this once this political emancipation is achieved, the exploitation, the repression is lies within the civil society, not within the state. That is the master-servant relation within the factory. Now, this could be abolished if private property in productive resources was abolished. But Marx was also aware that this would not lead to total human emancipation. Why was that? Because Marx was aware that the processes are overdetermined. It is not just if you remove economic exploitation by abolishing private property, that all exploitations and all repressions would have been abolished. We will also elaborate what we think is the politically useful definition of class. We will also detail the subdivision of class into fundamental and subsumed classes and see the significance of the frequently ignored subsumed classes. Finally, we will see in what sense a country is characterized as a feudal or a capitalist society. Now, what is the significance of abolition of private property? Marx's political agenda leads to the analytic of entry point of class, as we had argued. Class is the relation between men formed in the process. Relation between men means, I'm not using it in a gendered sense. Classes formed in the process of performing estranged labor or surplus labor. The exploited class or classes performing surplus labor for the exploiting class or classes. This is the relation formed in the process of in the class process, that is. I'm quoting from economic and philosophical manuscripts. The relation of man to himself becomes objective and real for him only through his relationship to other men. If, therefore, he regards the product of his labor, the relationship of man to himself becomes objective and real for him only through his relationship to other men. This is a general statement, not relating to exploitation. That is, when I think alone, I think of myself. That is, we recollect the Hegelian term, pure subjectivity, free will. But it becomes objective only when I know what the other is thinking of me. At least I think I know what the other is thinking of me. Then it takes an objective form. So the relationship of man to himself becomes objective and real for him only through his relationship to other men. If, therefore, he regards the product of his labor, his objectified labor, as an alien, hostile, and powerful object, which is independent of him, then his relationship to that object is such that another man, alien, hostile, powerful, and independent of him, is its master. She says, because our relation, because my relationship to myself becomes objective only when I enter into a relationship with another. So my relationship to myself, what is that? That is the labor that I perform. Man realizes himself in labor. If, therefore, regards the product of his labor, in which he was previously realizing himself, his relationship to that object, his objectified labor, as an alien, hostile, and powerful object, which is independent of him, then his relationship to that object is such that another man, alien, hostile, powerful, and independent of him, is its master. If he relates to his own activity as unfree activity, then he relates to its activity in the service under the rule, coercion, and yoke of another man. Marx is here talking of a capitalist system. The relationship of man to himself is man's relation to his own labor. Man realizes himself in labor, which cannot be performed and so objectified until he has entered into a servile relationship with persons owning the alienable means of production. That is, we have discussed this process that through the Industrial Revolution and before that through the various stages of dispossession, the working people have lost their ownership of all the alienable means of production, what can be taken away from him. Only he is left with one means of production, that is his own power to labor, which cannot be taken away from him because it will spell his death. So all these have been taken away. So for man to realize himself, to man to objectify his labor, put his labor into production, he will have to now depend on the factory owner. Now, when he enters the factory, he is under the control. He has sold his labor power. The labor power now belongs to someone else. He has no interest in this labor power. This alien, hostile, and powerful. This becomes now the source of surplus value, the source of capital, which is again used, expansion of capital, which will again be used for his exploitation. So he is hostile to his own objectified labor because he has a hostile relationship with the person who is owning the other means of production. Because when he enters the factory, he has to sell his labor power and become a servant and to the master, the capitalist. From the working class position, the most oppressive and most vicious alienation is that of a human being from his own labor. This is the result of his dispossession of means of production through primitive accumulation and their ownership by capital. Hence, from this position, class is chosen as the entry point into the discourse of emancipation. So Marx is concerned with emancipation, and class is chosen because this is the most vicious kind of alienation, because man, according to Marx and Engels, realizes himself in labor. That is, we know that we exist, that we are human, only when we can plan something and execute that plan. So once ability is taken away from us, so this is the most vicious alienation, that my labor power now I have to sell to someone and then it becomes hostile to me. But class is not an obvious surface category like the entry point of classical political economy, that is Homo economicus, the individual who tries to maximize own utility, which was visible on the surface, which was the founding myth of what Marx called the vulgar economics. Class has to be abstracted from the apparently obvious production apparatus. On the surface, you'll find, for example, those who belong to the discipline of economics will know that your standard textbooks, the mainstream textbooks, always teach us that you have the factors of production, you have land, labor, capital, and each factor of production does its bit, contributes something to production, and for this contribution, it is entitled. So, profit is the entitlement to capital because it is contributing something. The machines are contributing something. Wage is the entitlement of the worker because the labor is contributing something. Land is the entitlement. Rent is the entitlement of the landowner because the land is necessary for setting up the factory. So this is what appears at the surface. Only when you penetrate to the surface, when you go, so it is not obvious on the surface, the class. Even when I say that we have to look at the economy, now this class has to be constructed. It is an abstraction, because if you look at the surface, this is what you see. Only when you go deep into it, you will see that some people are laboring and some people are living lavish lifestyles without labor. So how are they able to do this? This is because the surplus is being extracted from the people who are laboring. So you have to go deep down and construct this class analysis. Marx was not unequivocally convinced that terminating private property would be sufficient for establishing socialism. Exploitative class relation is undoubtedly the single most significant cause of alienation of people from humanity, as we have just discussed, according to Marx, but it is not the sole cause. In places, there are traces that Marx was well aware of this, but elsewhere he may be seen to suggest it is the essential cause. For example, it appears, if you take a superficial reading of economic and philosophical manuscripts, and I'm quoting, the transcendence of private property is, therefore, the complete emancipation of all human senses and attributes. But it is this emancipation precisely because these senses and attributes have become subjectively and objectively human. In the same way, the senses and enjoyments of other men have become my own appropriation. Besides, these direct organs, therefore, social organs develop in the form of society. Thus, for instance, activity in direct association with others, etc., has become an organ for expressing my own life and a mode of appropriating human life. So, it appears if you read the first paragraph that it is just the transcendence of private property which will lead to complete emancipation. But then he is immediately adding a rider that this is emancipation precisely because his senses and attributes have become subjectively and objectively human. And what is that becoming subjectively and objectively human? The sense and enjoyments of other men have become my own appropriation, and my own sense and enjoyments have become other people. How? Through the development of organs, that is, associated producers. For instance, activity in direct association with others. So, Marx is saying that the immediate rider is that you have to think, you have to develop organs of human association, of direct association of producers, of working people. That is some sort of a new community. It is not the old traditional community. A new community will have to be developed. So it's not as if he is saying, though he appears to be saying that just you abolish private property and you'll, so the class analysis leads is all that you need. But no, you see that he refers to something much more than that. In these passages, there's an indication of economic determinism. Transcendence of private property would lead to complete human emancipation. But note his immediate supplement of activity in direct association with others as organs for expressing my life, obviously a reference to a new community life of liberated producers as condition for emancipation. Now, this is what we're discussing. Now, this word that I've used here, supplement, now this requires a bit of elaboration. Now, you see, supplement, what is a supplement? I say that, suppose I say that, say, Dipro is serious. Now, is, this word is, it one is dead. Now, suppose that you say that Indira Gandhi is dead. Now, that is has a finality. Now, that means that is means, well, it is the definition, equal to. Now, when I say Dipro is serious, that is that does not define him completely. Then you have to supplement. You have to say that he is serious, but he also is a theater person, but he also is a PhD scholar. Now, so these are the supplements. So when once you supplement, you see even the idea of serious, the serious itself. So when you supplement, you just don't add. You also change the meaning of what you're adding to. Seriousness now becomes a different kind of, a definite kind of seriousness. Seriousness as a theater personality, seriousness as a scholar, etc. Now he could be serious as a rioteer also. Nah? So, so a supplement is not just adding; it is also changing the meaning of the initial statement. So this is the idea of a supplement is very important. In the critique of Gotha program, arguing for the principle to each according to his work, Marx says that, you see, Marx says that there are, once this private property is abolished, there, then what will be the principle of distribution? It is no longer the capitalist principle of wages and profit, etc., etc. So from each according to his ability to each according to his labor, this will be the first, and then only you will have a stage when you'll have to develop to a stage where it will be from each according to his ability to each according to his labor. Now, to each according, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. This would be at the second stage. So why would you not immediately go to the second stage? He's saying equal right to each according to his work. That is the first principle. Marx says equal right here is still in principle bourgeois right. This equal right is still constantly stigmatized by a bourgeois limitation. I'm quoting, these are words from the critique of Gotha program. The right of the producers is proportional to the labor they supply. The equality consists in the fact that measurement is made with an equal standard labor. So you see, what Marx says, and he says, states this clearly later on in the same tract, Critique of the Gotha program, that oh no, it's here, equal right is stigmatized by bourgeois limitation. So you see, the laborer is now free because he is no longer under the yoke of capital, because private property in means of production has been abolished, so the capitalist is no longer there. But the worker is still suffering under the limitations of property rights. Why? The laborer thinks that I am the owner of a private property. What is that private property? My labor power. So I am supplying my labor power from each according to his ability. I am supplying my labor power, and as I am supplying, so I must get. So that is why from each according to his ability to each according to his work, not from each to each according to his need. Private property in alienable means of production has been abolished, but the workers conceive themselves as private owners of the inalienable means of production, the labor power to supply, hence the principle. We will deal with this ambiguity regarding abolition of private property and its corollary, the destined role of the proletariat, in detail later. Now, how do you define class? There are various ways in class is defined, and we'll spell it out clearly here. We are spelling it out clearly here that we are taking a definition that has been proposed, clearly stated by Resnick and Wolff in Knowledge and Class, but it's also a definition which we can take Capital Volume 1, Chapter 36, 37. We can take various quotes from there which will support this definition. But of course, there are other passages which support other definitions of classes also. So what is the definition we're using? Processes of production, appropriation, distribution, and receipt. These are the class processes. Now, so our main argument is that given Marx's overwhelming concern with exploitation analysis of social order should start from the mode of exploitation, that is, with the way in which surplus produced by one class is appropriated by other class or classes. Now, there are other ways of defining class, say in terms of power, say in terms of property ownership, etc. These have been used, but we stick to this definition because Marx was concerned with the exploitation of the workers, and in that sense, this is the surplus that is being extracted, the process of extraction of surplus, production, appropriation, and then again redistribution and receipt. All these become part of the generation and the extraction of surplus. It is true that class defined in this sense is an abstraction, just as all categories are. The definition of class being grounded in an abstraction, classes may not be the best strategic unit for actual political mobilization. You see, class, when we just as we referred to in the course of our lecture today, that the worker capitalist relation, this is not an obvious relation. This you have to abstract. On the surface of it, what the mainstream says is that, well, capital is contributing something, land is contributing something, worker is contributing something. They're all getting their returns. But then you see that why is it that some people work and some people do not work? Then you construct the relation of class, the class processes, production, appropriation, distribution, and receipt of surplus. So the definition of class being grounded in abstraction, classes may not be the best strategic unit for actual mobilization. This is not something which you can just feel. Even the working people, it's not something that they can always feel. These are perhaps discussed better in terms of class factions with identity of interest, like say construction workers, unorganized sector workers, gig economy workers, etc. So when you're talking of political mobilization, perhaps this class, working class, whose surplus is being extracted, this large definition, this may not be the proper unit for mobilization. But the entry point, why? Because different segments of workers will have their different interests, and they would probably be organized initially according to their concrete interests. But the entry point of class, defined in terms of surplus, does not rule out the further refinement of the analysis by subsequent introduction of class subdivisions on the basis of interest. This is the positive aspect of overdetermination. You see, as we mentioned yesterday, that because overdetermination says that you enter from a point, you enter through class process. Then you go to the political process. The political process then overdetermines the class process. You go to the cultural process. That overdetermines the class process. The class process overdetermines the cultural process, and so on. So now to understand, to give greater depth, concreteness to each class process, then we have to consider you have to supplement. That is the term. That is why overdetermination allows supplementation. You see, if I was essentialist, I'd say that, well, you have one chance. You say Dipro is what? What is Dipro? Dipro is serious. Finished. That's all. But once you have this idea of overdetermination, well, Dipro is not just serious. He does something else. So what does he do? He does this. Then that again goes back to reflecting on his nature of his seriousness. So overdetermination is which is what allows supplementation. So we can subsequently go on to see the subdivision of class, subdivision of interest within the working class. But this definition does highlight the fact that is the process of production, appropriation, distribution, and receipt. This definition does highlight the fact that class analysis is essential to understand the root of economic misery, for defining the economic goal of working class movement, and marking the equivalence of different segments of working people. We are making three statements here. One, this exploitation is what causes some people to work miserably for 12 hours, 14 hours, 10 hours, and some people to just spend money. So this exploitation is at the root of the economic misery that only class analysis can yield. Secondly, the goal of working class movement must be to end this class exploitation. So for this also class analysis is necessary. And thirdly, for marking the equivalence of different segments, equivalence of interests of different segments of working people, we need the class analysis, which makes them all belong to a group who are performing surplus labor, which is being extracted by another class. Surplus is defined as the production over and above the socially sanctioned needs of the surplus producing class. This is not physiologically defined, but depends on the prevailing culture and politics. You see, what should be the subsistence need? Over and above the needs. So what is this need? This need is not determined simply by what we need physiologically, biologically, what the food we have to consume, the clothes that we have to wear in order to shelter ourselves from heat and cold. It's not that. In some cultures, it may be seen as perfectly necessary that people should have, everyone should have, say, a television set or a refrigerator. In some cultures, in the poor countries, this may not be a part of what is sanctioned as subsistence requirements. So it depends on the prevailing culture and politics, and also on politics. The more conservative the situation, the less will be the sanctioned needs of the surplus producing classes. Now, Resnick and Wolff further qualify the definition by dividing the class category into two different categories: fundamental and subsumed class process. Again, this is of course taken from this definite. Fundamental and subsumed also again is attributable to capital. Now, a fundamental class process is one where production and appropriation of surplus takes place. For example, the process between the serf and the lord, the bondsman, the one who was bonded to the earth, bandua mazdoor, and the lord who is taking the surplus. This was in the feudal system. The process between the factory worker and the capitalist. These are fundamental class process. The first is the fundamental is a feudal fundamental class process, and the second is a capitalist fundamental class process. A subsumed class process is one where the already appropriated surplus is distributed and received. Now, the capitalist extracts the surplus from the worker, but then to facilitate the quick return of invested capital, if he holds on to the inventory of produced goods before it can be sold to the final consumer, to the final buyer, if he has to hold on to the inventory, then his capital would be locked up and he could not be able to roll it and make more products and earn profit, quick turnover of profit. So he has to rely on the merchant, the specialist merchants who will buy his goods, keep them in the inventory. So for the part of surplus appropriated by the capitalist is paid to the merchant in order to facilitate the quick return of invested capital. The process between the industrial capitalist and the merchant would be a subsumed class process, and the trader's margin a subsumed class payment. So the capitalist is extracting surplus, and out of the surplus value that the capitalist is extracting, passing on some to the merchant. This is distribution and receipts. First was production and appropriation surplus, which is a fundamental class process, and then distribution of the already appropriated surplus and its receipt by another class. This would be a subsumed class process. As can be seen from this example, subsumed class payments are made to facilitate the fundamental class processes. There could be other subsumed class processes. For example, you have the capitalist has to take loan from the financial sector, so it pays interest. So the relation between the two would be a subsumed class process. There are different ways in which surplus is appropriated by the exploiting classes. For example, in the feudal fundamental class process, surplus is extracted through feudal rights over a territory granted by the monarch, which allow feudal classes to extract feudal rent from producers, mainly peasants, residing within the territory. So there is a territory. For example, you take the Jomidar. He was granted the Jomidari by the Mughal lord. And within the Jomidari, the peasants would be, the people would be living within the territory, within that territory. They were obliged to hand over a part of their product or hand over their labor, whichever, whatever way the rent was extracted, to the lord. We had a similar system, though not exactly the same, in the Western feudalism, where you had the manorial lord, who would be equivalent to the Jomidar, and you had the serf, who would be equivalent to the ryots here. Now, so here the right to extract surplus is granted. You have political discrimination by the state. So it is granted, and on the basis of that feudal right to extract surplus. In the capitalist fundamental class process, surplus is extracted through ownership of means of production, which allows capitalists to appropriate surplus value produced by workers employed by them to use the means of production in the form of profit. So here, there is no special privilege granted to the capitalist. The capitalist simply extracts surplus through the working of the economic system. The workers, they have lost all the means of production through a historical process, and now, but this is a commercialized system where you have to buy things in the market. You do not produce for your own self because you don't have the means of production either. So in order to have the purchasing power, what do? You sell whatever you possess. What do you possess? You possess only the power to labor. So you sell labor power to the capitalist, and the capitalist then uses this labor power to activate the machines and to then use the intermediate goods to produce the final product. So the capitalist then has purchased all these things. So by the rule of the market, is entitled to whatever you can get by mixing these things together, and so is the owner of the final output. So you have borne a certain cost buying, purchasing labor power, in investing in fixed capital, in buying inputs, etc. And so you're the owner of whatever is produced, sell it in the market, you get a revenue, deduct the cost from it, the profit, that belongs to you. So it's through the working of the capitalist market that the capitalist extracts surplus. So these are different ways of extracting surplus, and these mark out whether a fundamental task process is a feudal fundamental task process, or a capitalist fundamental task process, or a slave fundamental task process, etc. Now, apart from the fundamental class processes, we said that there are the subsumed class processes. Now, subsumed class processes are analytically subsequent to the fundamental class processes, but are not inferior in significance. Now, because we are saying that the one is fundamental, the other subsumed, doesn't make them less important. Subsumed class payments would include, among others, for example, in a capitalist system, payments made by capitalists to merchants, money lenders, managers, shareholders, governments, rentiers, etc. So from the merchants, what do you get? The merchant holds the inventory. From money lenders, what do you get? You get money to invest. Managers, what do you get? You get supervision, which is previously done by the capitalists themselves. Shareholders, they are also providing capital. And the government, it maintains the overall legal framework within which you can, the market can operate. And it also gives you certain benefits in terms of privileges, rights over the workers. For example, in certain cases, trade union rights may be covered by the government. So you pay the government for this. What do you pay? You pay taxes. And the rent you pay to the persons who own the land, etc. These payments are made out of the surplus extracted from workers through the capitalist fundamental class process, but are accounted as costs within the capitalist accounting system. So we are saying that these are subsumed class processes, class payments, which are made in order to facilitate the extraction of surplus by the capitalist. So this is being made, payment made by the capitalist to facilitate surplus extraction. But within the capitalist accounting system, this is as much a cost as wage. So, but these are accounted as costs within the capitalist accounting system. The rate of profit or profit on invested capital, or the rate of profit on unit wage, are often taken as indicators of the efficiency. And often one hears that investment is not occurring in the state because of worker militancy resulting in lower efficiency. This is something which used to be said over and over again during the left front regime, that why is investment not taking place in West Bengal? Because of the trade union movement, which is very militant, and this is reducing workers' efficiency. Now, what is the how is efficiency measured? By the rate of profit on invested capital, or the rate of profit on unit wage. Now, the problem is the capitalist accounting of efficiency considers subsumed payments as costs that are deducted to calculate profit rate or on capital, or profit rate on wage. The fact could be that there are differential taxes that offset any locational or geophysical advantage that such a state enjoys while favoring others. For example, there was this huge, I'm just giving an example, we are not going to the details of this. There was a huge hue and cry over the freight equalization, which still exists. So what does this freight equalization do? You see, if coal is extracted in the eastern India, and then this coal would cost the same here as it would cost in, say, Mumbai. So you have this is called freight equalization. Now, at the same time, Mumbai has certain locational advantages. Its nearness to the sea, the development of the financial sector there. These are its particular advantages. But the advantage of the eastern India, particularly of West Bengal, This is taken away by, and Jharkhand, this is taken away by freight equalizer. So this could be a reason why capital doesn't come here. All the locational advantages, these are being manipulated through what? Through the subsumed class payments. So here you have but the capitalist accounting system would consider these as costs, and so we would have the rates of profit as different. Similarly, when a company pays an incentive to managers, the workers appear to be less efficient. Sometimes you have most big companies have arrangements managers where incentives are based on sales or on profits are paid to managers. So these, the more the incentives paid to the managers, the less efficient would the workers appear to be. So the subsumed class processes are significant. Each class processes involves two class positions. The capitalist fundamental class process involves the position of the producer of surplus value, that is the working class position, and the position of the appropriator of surplus value, the capitalist class position. Class entry point to analysis does not imply that, like orthodox Marxism, this interpretation too thinks that economic process is the base and other processes are part of the superstructure determined by the base. We start from the economic or class process, go on to see the political processes. We then see the impact of these processes on the nature of the class processes, then to the feedback, and so on. Similarly, for interaction between other processes. So you see, we enter into the class process, we see that we have the industrial sector is a capitalist sector. Then we go on to we look at the political process. We're giving a very surface example. We see that some capitalists are growing at a tremendous rate. And when we give a term, crony capital. So this is a politically created thing. Now this is then impacting the nature of capitalist growth within the country. So you have continuous interaction. We see the impact of these processes on the nature of class process, then to the feedback, and so on. This process will be quite literally unending. But this does not detract from the merit of overdetermination as a method of analysis. Someone may say, well, this is unending, so you can't reach any conclusion. Whereas you take our method of analysis, it is, we can reach a conclusion. It is true for, you see, this continuing nature is true for any statement on a social object based on any method of analysis or point of view. The object will have evolved even when the statement is being made. So we are stating that at this moment we are saying that, Ambani is making some ground compared to Adani. But the moment I'm making the statement, it may be that the things are changing. So it's always true when you make a statement about the social situation that things may be changing while you're making the statement. So this is not just about Marxist analysis, it is true for other analysis also. Marx and Marxists have characterized societies as feudal, capitalist, etc. What this means is that the dominant form of production is feudal or capitalist. That is, the dominant form of surplus extraction is feudal fundamental capitalist feudal fundamental class process, capitalist fundamental class process. By dominance, we do not mean that most people are employed in such sectors, or even that most of the GDP is produced in this sector. For example, in India, what is recognized as a capitalist sector, there are some, you have to formal wage contracts, etc. This may not exist in a large part of the economy. But still, we would say that this is a capitalist economy. What we mean is that the production units, which are characterized by other modes of production, for instance, they are produced in the unorganized sector, household sector, etc. These are also subservient to the dominant sector enterprises. They are supplying according to their needs, according to markets created by them, etc. In that sense, we would say that this is a capitalist economy. For example, in India, a large part of the population formally works under systems that cannot be termed as formal contractual wage agreements. The vast unorganized sector, for example. But a large part of this segment works for the formal capitalist sector, laboring at their behest according to the work put out to them. Though it is also true that a large part of the unorganized sector, the marginalized rural, agriculture and non-agricultural production sector, may be self-contained, largely insulated from the capitalist sector. This may be true, and then this would require a different kind of control by the state. We are not going into that. So I was hoping that we could go into the beginning of capitalism, but I think that already I have taken up too much time. Too much time meaning, of course, that of course um, this was necessary. I didn't anticipate how long it would take really. Uh, so I think I will end my deliberation here, and I'm open to questions now.
Hello,
Ah,
sir. I have got two questions. Firstly, when you said that after the means of production are owned by the state, and that is that that is not the end. Actually, we need a new community for the um, um, for the for the real emancipation. In the Soviet system, in the earlier days, almost all the means of production were owned by the state. So, in that case, in such cases, what is the actual need for the next stage? When the state itself, quote unquote, is taking care of the interest of the working class. That
shall I
is my first
answer the
question.
question first? No, you go on. Second
Of the
question.
working class. When the state itself is taking care of the interest of the working class. That is my first question. And secondly, if after say in respect of the Bolshevik Revolution, when the the kingship was ended and the state and the Bolshevik or the socialist state was established, do you think that there was but and the entire system broke down after about 70 years? Do you think that the Mao's idea of cultural revolution is important in this respect?
Now, take up the first question. You see that even the point is that Marx is making the Marx does not discuss much about very little about what would be the future state once the revolution has occurred. The only a bit of a detailed analysis you find in the Critique of the Gotha program, which itself is a small pamphlet. Now, what he is saying here is that you see, it is the state owns all the means of production. All right, the state could then implement what is called from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. The state has the power to do that. But Marx is saying that what Marx is saying here is that you have to, the state cannot do, it cannot be dictatorial. That if you read between the lines, what Marx is saying is that the state cannot be dictatorial. The state must pay heed to what the worker is thinking, and the worker is conceiving himself. He's saying that tinted with bourgeois consciousness, no? Something like that. That the worker is thinking of himself as a owner of private, as a private property owner. What is that property? That is the power to labor. That of course belongs to each worker separately. And now the worker is his culture is still tinged with bourgeois values of private property and markets, and therefore he says that if I work, if Devashish is working less than me, why should Devashish get the same as me? Or if he has got more dependence, he may get more than me also. So this is the consciousness of the worker. So what Marx is saying here is that the consciousness of the workers must be raised. And what is the way in which it can be raised? Here there is a clear suggestion that certain organs must develop of association of direct producers. So he's talking of a new kind of community, which is also something which is elaborated yes works of group. So this was the first question. The second was that why did it collapse? Now, that is a very difficult question. Now, this we will partially we'll talk about this. You see, my feeling is, of course, that the concept of the vanguard party. Now, this is related in a way to what you were saying. We were saying that if the state is in possession of the means of production, why can't the state directly do implement the principle to each according to his need? Now, if there you see, this then becomes, this is a possibility where the state becomes very autocratic. Now, how does the state become autocratic? It is through the vanguard party. The vanguard party becomes very dictatorial. Now, the concept of the vanguard party, which was not there in Marx, it is a Leninist principle. Now, I'm not going into the details of this vanguard party. Party is necessary. What kind of party? An organization without an organization, how do you fight an organization? So on. But maybe this, we will come to this in a later lecture, that the vanguard party, the conception of the working class as embodying human emancipation, these did not materialize. We'll touch upon some possible causes, but not into detail. Now, about the cultural revolution, that is a separate question, I think, because the cultural revolution meant different things to different people. But cultural revolution, there is a discussion about the cultural revolution in a knitwear factory, I think, by Paul Suzy and someone else, Monthly Review Press. There is saying that cultural revolution is, of course, it would be related to what you are saying, that it trains the worker to think beyond oneself, that there is the factory will require a system of hierarchical arranged. Someone will plan, someone will execute. That will be necessary. But you keep rotating. That one who is today the worker will tomorrow be the planner, etc., etc. Now, that is possibly a way of reducing alienation within the factory, but that would not answer the problem of the transition from to each according to his labor and to each according to his need. Okay. Yes.
Anyone else? Is there any questions? Yes. You can speak.
Yes.
Please unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself. You cannot be heard.
Hello. Now,
Yes.
Yes.
am I audible now?
Yes.
My name is P.S. Mukherjee. I'm a retired manager of a multinational company. Okay. So I had dealt with many a time with the workers, negotiations, etc. Okay, but I may sound little bit naive, but my question will be a political one. In a sense, what my earlier, listener asked the question, Devasi. It is in line with the cultural revolution of Mao. Okay. Do you think, or may we assume that the cultural revolution is in line with the over-determination what you have taught, till now? It's a product of over-determination which Mao followed. But in that sense, why he, retracted after Shanghai Paris Commune? After Shanghai Paris Commune, Mao again went back to, this three-party line. That means military party. Okay, so that is my question. Why he withdrew himself from after Shanghai Commune? That is my question.
Now, why he withdrew? I think this is a I really don't have the answer, probably because of the chaotic situation that was resulting in parts. But the first part of the question, which you didn't repeat at the end, was this the idea of the cultural revolution? Can it be the result of the fact that Mao was using an overdetermined structure for analysis? I would agree with that. That yes, in fact, the idea of overdetermination follows from contradiction, which was elaborated by Mao first, which Althusser admits. So politics in command. That's what Mao is saying. That cultural bombard the headquarters. No? That is because this is see overdetermination also leads to the conclusion, as we mentioned today, that it's always ongoing. Now you see, when I'm saying that from each according to each according to his work, and then next stage, last stage. When say last stage is to each according to his, there's no last stage actually, because the processes are unending. So there will human emancipation is never complete. We will discuss this later. Human emancipation is never really completed, nah? Because it is not as if there is any segment of the population, be it the working class even, which embodies the idea of human emancipation. Human emancipation continuously evolves. There will be newer forms of repression as we go along, and then these have to be fighted. So that is what Mao is saying, that what is the sense of the culture? We bombard the party headquarters. Why? Because the party itself, every time it becomes fossilized, you see the vanguard of the workers, they try to dictate, and so they now become the centers of power. So then you have to destroy that center. So this goes on. Of course, this will result in chaos, some chaos, and probably this was the reason why this was uh, abandoned. But there were also some questions of inner party struggles, and etc. etc.
Sir, just one more thing. I'm Devashish. What? So, exactly what I could find that Marx talked about a new rationality, which is different from the new rationality which would be different from the capitalist rationality. Am I correct? Hello.
I'm trying to figure out actually whether we would call it a rationality. Of course, it's a rationality. Of course, any system would be rational. But he was not talking. The rationality is not very significant. New rationality or old rationality, because what was significant to him was emancipation. Now, emancipation is of course a rationality in itself, but you have different forms of emancipation. Like the birth of capitalism is itself embodies a certain form of emancipation, a certain form of freedom as compared to the feudal system it was replacing. But I don't think that a new rationality would. Why are you insisting on this rationality? Do you think that it will add something? Devashish.
I'm not insisting exactly, but uh, as we understand the liberal system, where the utility maximization is the rationality, and through that process, the market maximizes, so that we agrees upon that the market
Reaches an equilibrium.
yes. So unless that sense of rationality is changed, so how the people or the human beings can go for a different sort of different line of thought, that this is not what
Now, you see, of course, mobilization is a political process. Na? And for this mobilization, whether now you see this idea that the market, we are all equal individuals in the civil society, and we are self utility maximizing UMAXs, and through our independent actions coordinated by the market, the system will reach an equilibrium. This is something which we middle class educated people are either taught, or we grow this sense that there is nothing can be done. The market has determined the price like this. But for mobilization, I'm not very sure that hitting at this kind of rationality, saying that, well, this is Marx. We discussed this also. Marx's critique of liberal thinking, where he says that what does liberalism, human emancipation, what does political emancipation do? There is the belief, there is the propaganda that political emancipation leads to a full human emancipation. Now, that is the end. Political emancipation in their context meant, of course, the end of religious discrimination. Now, Marx says that no, what it does is to just displace the inequities within the political system to the civil society. That state is no longer iniquitous, in the sense that you have, say, he was anticipating, of course, if you have adult suffrage, then the state is not iniquitous, but the inequities have been shifted to the working of the civil society. Within that, you have the factory system, where you have the master-servant relation. Now, to mobilize, whether to say that, because this faith in the market, this is not something, I think this is more embedded in us, the middle classes and the intellectual people. Mobilization probably will not require people to be made aware of the failures of the market. You have to go directly to the political source, as Marx did, that you are being exploited and what is the nature of your exploitation, so on. Of course, this is something a bit beyond me. Yes.
Do we have any more question? Pranabda, I don't think we have any more questions. So we can end the session here.
Okay, thank you all for listening patiently. I hope that we have been, the discussions, of course, they are enriching me. I don't know how you are getting enriched, but anyway, thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good night.